Most central Texans are under water restrictions, while farmers and other companies have different rules for water use.
Hidden beneath the endless expanse of Texas hill country lies one of the most remarkable ecological mysteries in North America. A 5,500-acre ranch that was once described as the worst piece of land in the region, now transformed into a thriving ecosystem that supports over 220 species of birds and produces thousands of gallons of fresh water daily from springs that had been dry for decades. The transformation defied every expectation of what was possible in this harsh, cedar-choked landscape. What if I told you that this ancient land management technology is starting to reshape how we think about ranch restoration across Texas, and that scientists believe it could hold the key to transforming millions of acres of degraded rangeland into productive, water-rich forests? Texas is currently facing one of its most severe rangeland crises in history. Across the state, traditional ranching operations are struggling with groundwater depletion, invasive cedar encroachment, and the loss of native grasslands that once supported diverse wildlife populations. The Ashe juniper, commonly called cedar, has invaded millions of acres, creating impenetrable thickets that choke out native vegetation and prevent water infiltration. Meanwhile, climate change is intensifying drought conditions, making water scarcity an existential threat for ranchers across the region. But there exists an ancient approach to land management that indigenous peoples of Texas perfected over thousands of years. A technology so effective that it can restore springs that have been dry for decades, transform barren cedar thickets into diverse ecosystems, and create water abundance in landscapes where conventional wisdom says abundance is impossible. Stay until the end, because today you're going to discover how this mind-blowing ancient technology is being rediscovered by modern ranchers who believe it could hold the key to solving Texas's rangeland crisis and transforming the state's most degraded landscapes into thriving, productive forests. Welcome to Forgotten Lands. In 1969, J. David Bamberger made what seemed like the worst business decision of his life. He deliberately sought out and purchased what he called the worst piece of ranch land he could find in the Texas hill country, 3,000 acres of severely degraded rangeland in Blanco County that was described by locals as a wall-to-wall cedar thicket. The land showed dramatic soil erosion, had no surface water flow, and supported fewer than 50 species of birds. Most ranchers would have considered it worthless. But Bamberger had a vision that seemed impossible to everyone around him. He believed that this devastated landscape could be restored to its original condition using techniques that had been forgotten for over a century. What he discovered over the next 5 decades would revolutionize our understanding of what's possible when ancient land management wisdom meets modern conservation science. The transformation began with what seemed like a simple technique: the selective removal of invasive Ashe juniper. But this wasn't random clearing. Bamberger and his team were applying principles that indigenous peoples of Texas had perfected over millennia. Understanding which trees to remove, which to leave, and how to create the precise conditions that would allow native grasslands to return. The results were nothing short of miraculous. Within just a few years of beginning the restoration, springs that had been dry for decades began to flow again. The main spring now produces an average of 3 gallons per minute. That's 4,320 gallons of fresh water every single day, enough to supply all the water needs of the entire 5,500-acre ranch. The overflow from this spring, combined with other smaller springs and seeps, now creates the headwaters of Miller Creek, which flows into the Pedernales River and eventually into the Colorado River that supplies water to Austin. If you're amazed by this transformation so far, comment "forest" below, and let me know what you think could happen if we applied these techniques across Texas's millions of acres of degraded rangeland. The science behind this ancient technology is now being validated by modern research. The selective removal of cedar allows native grasses to return, and these grasses create completely different hydrological conditions than the invasive cedar thickets. Native grasses have deep root systems that create channels for water infiltration, while their seasonal growth and decay cycles build soil organic matter that acts like a sponge, storing water during wet periods and releasing it slowly during dry times. The cedar thickets, by contrast, create what hydrologists call interception loss. Their dense canopies capture rainfall before it can reach the ground, and their shallow root systems create impermeable soil layers that cause water to run off, rather than infiltrate. By removing the cedar and allowing native vegetation to return, Bamberger had essentially restored the natural water cycle that had sustained this landscape for thousands of years. But the water restoration was just the beginning. As the native grasslands returned, they created habitat for an explosion of biodiversity. The ranch now supports 221 documented bird species, more than 4 times the number present when restoration began. This includes endangered species like the golden-cheeked warbler and the recently delisted black-capped vireo, neither of which had been documented on the property before restoration began. The transformation created what biologists call edge habitats, the transition zones between different ecosystem types that provide critical resources for wildlife. About 15% of the landscape remains in carefully managed cedar thicket, while the rest has been restored to grasslands, oak savanna, and riparian areas. This diversity mirrors what scientists believe the hill country looked like before European settlement, when indigenous peoples managed the landscape using controlled burns and selective harvesting. The restoration process revealed the sophisticated understanding that indigenous peoples had of ecosystem dynamics. They knew that complete removal of cedar would be as destructive as allowing it to dominate. Instead, they maintained a mosaic of habitats that supported different species at different times of year. The remaining cedar provides nesting habitat for golden-cheeked warblers, which require mature Ashe juniper bark for their nests, while the restored grasslands support ground-nesting birds and the insects they depend on. The water management aspects of the restoration demonstrate principles that indigenous peoples had perfected over millennia. The strategic placement of remaining cedar groves creates microclimates that reduce evaporation and provide windbreaks for more sensitive vegetation. The restored grasslands act as natural sponges, absorbing rainfall during wet periods and slowly releasing it during dry times. This creates a buffering effect that moderates the extreme wet and dry cycles that characterize the Texas climate. The soil restoration component of the project has been equally remarkable. When Bamberger first acquired the land, much of it showed severe erosion, with exposed bedrock and deep gullies carved by runoff. The restoration of native vegetation has completely reversed this degradation. The deep root systems of native grasses have stabilized the soil, while their seasonal growth and decay cycles have rebuilt the organic matter content that gives soil its water-holding capacity. Modern soil analysis shows that restored areas now have significantly higher levels of organic carbon, improved water infiltration rates, and enhanced nutrient cycling compared to adjacent unrestored areas. This soil improvement creates a positive feedback loop. Healthier soils support more diverse plant communities, which in turn improves soil health even further. This demonstrates how indigenous land management techniques worked with natural processes to create self-reinforcing systems that became more productive over time. The economic benefits have been equally remarkable. The ranch now operates as a successful conservation enterprise, hosting educational programs for over 2,000 children annually, conducting research partnerships with multiple universities, and demonstrating sustainable land management practices to thousands of visitors each year. The restored ecosystem provides hunting opportunities, wildlife viewing, and ecotourism revenue that far exceeds what the land could have generated as degraded rangeland. Modern scientific validation of these techniques has come through decades of research and monitoring. The ranch has won numerous awards from organizations including the Soil and Water Conservation Service, the Texas Forest Service, the National Arbor Day Foundation, the Nature Conservancy of Texas, the Texas Wildlife Association, and the prestigious Leopold Conservation Award, the highest recognition for private land conservation in North America. If this story is inspiring you to think differently about what's possible on degraded rangeland, hit that like button and subscribe to Forgotten Lands for more stories of ancient wisdom solving modern environmental challenges. The transformation at Bamberger Ranch represents something much larger than a single success story. It demonstrates that the indigenous peoples of Texas had developed sophisticated land management technologies that modern science is only beginning to understand. These weren't primitive techniques. They were advanced ecological engineering approaches that worked with natural systems rather than against them. Archaeological evidence suggests that indigenous peoples across Texas used controlled burns, selective harvesting, and strategic water management to maintain diverse, productive landscapes for thousands of years. The oak savannas, native grasslands, and riparian forests that early European settlers described weren't wilderness. They were carefully managed ecosystems that supported both human communities and abundant wildlife. The techniques being rediscovered at Bamberger Ranch are now being studied and applied across Texas and the broader Southwest. The Nature Conservancy is using similar approaches to restore native grasslands along the Texas coast. Universities are researching how traditional ecological knowledge can be integrated with modern conservation science. Federal and state agencies are exploring how these methods could be scaled up to address rangeland degradation across millions of acres. The potential for scaling these techniques is enormous. Texas contains over 130 million acres of rangeland, much of it degraded by overgrazing, cedar encroachment, and poor water management. If even a fraction of this land could be restored using indigenous-inspired techniques, the environmental and economic benefits would be transformational. Consider the water implications alone. If techniques similar to those used at Bamberger Ranch could restore springs and improve water infiltration across just 10% of Texas rangeland, it could create billions of gallons of additional water resources annually. This could help address the state's growing water scarcity while reducing dependence on groundwater pumping that's depleting aquifers across the region. The carbon sequestration potential is equally significant. Restored grasslands and forests act as carbon sinks, storing atmospheric CO2 in soil and vegetation. Large-scale implementation of these restoration techniques could help Texas meet climate goals while creating more resilient landscapes that can better withstand drought and extreme weather events. The biodiversity benefits extend far beyond individual ranches. Texas is home to more bird species than any other state, but habitat loss and fragmentation threaten many populations. Landscape-scale restoration using indigenous techniques could create wildlife corridors that connect fragmented habitats and support species recovery across entire regions. The economic opportunities are substantial as well. Restored rangelands can support diverse revenue streams, including sustainable hunting, wildlife viewing, carbon credit sales, and ecotourism. Many ranchers are discovering that restored ecosystems can be more profitable than traditional cattle operations while requiring less external inputs and being more resilient to drought and market fluctuations. The success at Bamberger Ranch has inspired a growing movement of ranchers, conservationists, and researchers who are working to rediscover and apply indigenous land management wisdom. Organizations like the Traditional Native American Farmers Association are documenting traditional techniques and helping landowners implement them. Universities are establishing research programs that combine traditional ecological knowledge with modern science. Government agencies are beginning to recognize the potential as well. The USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service now offers cost-share programs for rangeland restoration that incorporate many of these techniques. The Texas Parks and Wildlife Department provides technical assistance and funding for habitat restoration projects. Federal programs like the Conservation Reserve Program are being modified to support indigenous-inspired restoration approaches. But perhaps most importantly, the transformation at Bamberger Ranch demonstrates that restoration is possible even on the most degraded landscapes. The ranch that was once considered worthless has become a model for sustainable land management that's being studied and replicated across the region. It proves that given the right techniques and enough time, nature has an extraordinary capacity to heal itself. The ancient technology that indigenous peoples developed over thousands of years offers solutions that modern engineering cannot match. These techniques work with natural processes rather than against them, creating resilient systems that can adapt to changing conditions while providing multiple benefits for both human communities and wildlife. The principles underlying these techniques are now being studied by researchers around the world. Universities are establishing programs that combine traditional ecological knowledge with modern scientific methods to understand how indigenous land management created such productive and resilient landscapes. This research is revealing that what European settlers often dismissed as wilderness was actually the result of sophisticated management systems that had been refined over thousands of years. The timing of this rediscovery couldn't be more critical. As Texas faces increasing challenges from climate change, water scarcity, and habitat loss, the wisdom embedded in these ancient techniques becomes more valuable than ever. The conventional approaches to land management that dominated the 20th century, intensive grazing, monoculture agriculture, and suppression of natural processes, have proven inadequate for creating resilient landscapes that can withstand environmental stresses. The success at Bamberger Ranch demonstrates that alternative approaches are not only possible, but can be more effective and economically viable than conventional methods. The ranch produces more wildlife, more water, more carbon sequestration, and more economic value per acre than it did under conventional management. This challenges fundamental assumptions about the trade-offs between conservation and economic productivity. The implications extend far beyond individual ranches. If these techniques could be applied across even a fraction of Texas's 130 million acres of rangeland, the cumulative benefits would be transformational. The state could significantly increase its water resources, reduce its carbon footprint, restore wildlife populations, and create new economic opportunities for rural communities. As Texas faces increasing challenges from climate change, water scarcity, and habitat loss, the wisdom embedded in these ancient techniques becomes more valuable than ever. The question isn't whether these methods can work. Bamberger Ranch and other successful restoration projects have proven their effectiveness. The question is whether we have the wisdom to learn from indigenous knowledge and the commitment to implement these solutions at the scale needed to address our current environmental challenges. The transformation of Texas rangeland from degraded cedar thickets to thriving forests isn't just possible, it's happening right now. And the ancient technology that makes it possible could be the key to creating a more sustainable and resilient future for the entire region. The indigenous peoples of Texas showed us the way. Now it's up to us to follow their example and restore the landscapes they once stewarded so successfully.